Welcome, everybody, to Recovery Machine. My name's Nathan, joined as always by co-host Corey. How you doing, Corey?
Very good, Nathan. Very good. We just chatted a couple days ago. This is back-to-back chats we're having. I love it.
Yeah, we had such a long break off. We're all fired up and episodes daily now. We're here today with a guest who goes by the name of Ted Perkins. How are you doing, Ted?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on the show. Very excited.
Oh, you're very welcome. Can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself so we get a little background?
Well, sure. Well, I'm a guy who's in recovery from alcohol use disorder for many years successfully. In my civilian life, I was a studio executive and a producer, a screenwriter. I mean, I still am. I write for television. I do consulting work. I've had kind of like a long and varied and kind of successful career in Hollywood, as it were. And that was, perhaps part of the problem because I had lavish expense accounts and going to parties all over the world and was kind of expected to treat people to alcohol, not to drinks and cocktails. And basically it was just like huge parties around the world 24/7. And it was fun until it wasn't. And so then I got into the recovery area and I thought it was really great. I just loved the people. I love the struggle. I love the victories. I love sort of like the work of helping people in recovery because I've sort of been there. I know what it's like and I know some of the downs and some of the highs and some of the things that people need to do. So I got involved with Smart Recovery for my own recovery. And then I branched out and got involved in developing some new treatment modalities, inspired by, everything that I've learned from both the film industry and the recovery industry.
Very cool. So it was basically your job you were kind of entertaining and partying for a living almost. I've got a couple friends who tried to walk that line for a while, and one of them remains in that position and his health is deteriorating. The other one has since stopped, but it is a very difficult thing to do if it's aligned with your profession. Was there anything you could do as far as trying to maintain a balance while you were in that lifestyle, or was it just, it sounds like at that level, maybe it's overwhelming to the nth degree.
Well, I would find, I think it would be very problematic. I think it is very problematic for certain people in certain industries, like especially entertainment, especially international film distribution, licensing, and production, which is, people in other countries have a different view of alcohol and not so much, let's just talk about alcohol specifically, because I wasn't into drugs and that's not my thing. I'm more like an alcohol, but it's so ingrained in the culture and the business work, etc. In Asia and Japan and Korea and now China, alcohol and drinking and partying and drinking together is such a huge part of the bonding process, of the loyalty creation, of the long-term relationship, strategic relationship building approach. And it's very hard to sort of divorce that from the process. And it's very difficult to say to people, "Oh, I don't drink," or to even be put in that position. It's gotten a lot better, but it's just saying, "Oh, I don't drink," when people are offering you to go to a room salon in Seoul, Korea to sign a big $1 million deal, and to not drink with them is sort of like, what? It almost, in a sense, puts the deal in jeopardy.
Right.
Especially in Asia, people think that they can't really trust you unless they've drunk with you. And again, in France, Spain, Germany, all these countries, in their own ways have different alcohol cultures and that seem more moderate, that seem more under control, less binge drinking, more social drinking. But it's a big part of that world, and so it's difficult in those industries. I feel bad for people who are still plying the trade in that particular side of the business that need to go out and have cocktails and drinks. Luckily, I'm on the writing and production side where what I do socially is totally irrelevant. And if I tell people that I don't drink, nobody asks, nobody cares. It's not even a thing. But if I were working for a sales company and I was going to the Cannes Film Festival right now, and I had a huge party that I was hosting and paying $1 million for, and I was trying to sell $20 million worth of film inventory to a bunch of Japanese and Chinese buyers, if I didn't drink with them, I'd be at a substantial financial disadvantage over my competitors for sure.
Wow. I didn't realize that the pressure was like that, especially in Asian countries. That maybe Japan a little bit. China surprises me that it's that much of the culture, but yeah, very interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to remember, and I've done a lot of work in China. I've produced movies in China. I know the China market very well. In fact, I'm doing consulting for China right now. And this wasn't always the case. It was more of like a bottomed, it was sort of like, everybody was very serious, very sedate, very sober, as it were. But incrementally over time, the idea of toasting and parties and drinking has become more prevalent. And I don't know what the official statistics are, but definitely larger scale, more abundant, more binge drinking, more hazing type business behaviors are becoming more normative, unfortunately.
Hmm.
And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, like, to become accepted on the world stage as a business partner, I think the Chinese started to realize that letting themselves down or letting themselves go a little bit, being a little bit wacky, crazy, would sort of reinforce their position as people that Westerners would feel comfortable doing business with. Because, unfortunately, they are known as very serious, upright people, and they are.
Yeah.
And so, Westerners are a little bit more, hey, let's be friends, let's be buddies. Hey, dude, let's do this deal. High five, woo!
Yeah.
And that's something that they had to learn, and something that doesn't come necessarily naturally from a cultural perspective.
Right.
So,
American influence, I guess.
well, before McDonald's, nobody had a problem with obesity or anything else. We totally exported that problem.
Yes,
So,
that's the first thing that came to mind. Actually, the rising obesity rates in Asia and how many you can correlate it directly to every fast food chain that shows up there. Like if you go back and look at it, it's interesting.
sadly, I have no comment on that matter, but there are parallels to drinking behaviors and things like that. I think that's definitely, there are parallels in terms of like exporting memes, exporting behaviors that are sometimes, I mean, I think everybody has the capacity to be addicted to certain things in certain ways culturally in their own context, but certainly when it comes to drugs and alcohol in different countries, the increase in certain levels of addiction, I think, has had a lot to do with bad habits being exported.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting parallels that you're bringing up already, Ted, between what you're saying and what Nathan and I and our community within the healthcare sector specifically. That so much of the threat, if you are walking a line of either sobriety or of even moderation, so much of the threat of it is the social aspect of it, and then for us, like the professional aspect too, of like, how am I going to keep all of these ducks in a row? How am I going to keep everything together? The perception of me, the image of me that I'm trying to project, how am I going to keep that together? And like you said, we have such a little, our focus has broadened as we've gone on in our show, but I can't imagine a more challenging environment than the entertainment world, really.
It is. But I think across the board, just in terms of business generally, if you come out and say, I don't drink, that sort of puts in the mind of somebody, oh, so if this guy has a drink or two drinks, he's going to go off the handle and become like an unqualified, reckless partner who's going to steal all our money and fuck up the deal, et cetera. That telegraphs something that people don't really want to know about you. And so you kind of have to keep it secret or try to avoid it. But you get into situations where it's just unavoidable. I had one episode when I was in Hong Kong doing a deal, and we said, round of cocktails, Ted, what are you having? I'm like, I'm gonna have a soda, and they're like, what? Like, it became a thing.
Mm.
And then I said, listen, no, I'm not. I didn't want to lie, so I said, I just don't drink anymore. I mean, I used to. I really enjoyed it, but not even for health reasons, just for personal reasons. I just don't feel it. And they're like, what? Like, it didn't even compute.
Right.
And the deal went through, everything was fine, but it became like this very uncomfortable situation. And I feel bad for people that are put in that situation. But on the other side, I think also people need to realize that justification for drinking, even though it's a bad idea for you, but using the fact that like you have to do it for business, is also pretty lazy as well. And if you really are committed to successful recovery, and you know that having just one is not going to work for you and never has and never will, then you just have to execute on your plan and be creative in the way that you justify it or explain it, or don't explain it, or just tell people to fuck off.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do what you got to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, the reason we've got you here today is because you've got a interesting new project going on, and we're wondering if you could tell us a little bit about it. It's called Recovery Movie Meetups.
Yeah, no, it's thanks for giving me the opportunity to explain what it is. Having worked in the film industry as long as I have, and also I taught screenwriting overseas a great deal, and I was looking at sort of like the recovery process. I was looking at rehab, the experience, and what it is to go from like having an addiction to dealing with it, overcoming the problem, going through the stages of change, and then emerging out the other side successfully. In most cases or some cases, hopefully as many more cases. And I realized that there's such great parallels to what actually movies are, in a sense that like movies really are, beginning, middle, and end. They start with a problem. Movies are all about characters who have a problem, who live in a state of disequilibrium with their environment, with their friends, with themselves. And they have to overcome a problem to get to the finish line. And they have to go up against themselves, against the bad people, against, Darth Vader, whomever you want. Every quest to overcome an addiction is sort of like a heroic struggle against improbable odds. But more than anything else, it's a struggle that's an internal struggle. It's a subjective struggle. And, the addiction survives as sort of like a largely subjective experience of people's minds. And then you objectively act out in the form of going to a liquor store or smoking a joint or, doing lines of cocaine or whatever it is. And I found that, doing as many thousands of meetings as I've done, I asked myself, well, if you went to a 12-step or smart recovery meeting or any kind of recovery meeting and you wore a blindfold, would you get the same result from it? And the answer is yes. Largely it's talk therapy. It's based on ideas, it's not based on anything subjective or visual. And I realized that there is a vast untapped market of potential solutions, therapeutic solutions, if people would introduce visual metaphors, stories, epic sagas, and films into a mutual support meeting format. And so I developed Recovery Movie Meetups as a way to create a structural way, a very therapeutic, clinically vetted, well peer-reviewed sort of method to introduce the viewing of movies in a recovery setting, which is its residential or IOP or even on your own. And then having some really rich discussions afterwards that are guided by this workbook that I also published, which is called the Recovery Movie Meetups Workbook. And it's 20 movies about addiction and recovery. So like the most popular ones, the most important ones, hand-selected, curated. So they're not just like, rampant drug films that are like gratuitous. No, it's movies with a message, movies that we can draw inferences and things. And we found by conducting a lot of these meetings already all over the country that the effects have been quite extraordinary. Deep listening, people who were not inclined to share suddenly start going off and sharing a lot and relating what they see in the movies to what their experiences are in real life. And that's created some opportunities for rich reevaluation and ultimately better decision making because, everybody loves movies, but to see yourself portrayed in a film or to see a character who's suffering from something similar from what you're dealing with or what your family's dealing with or what have you, to see that visually stimulates a part of your brain which allows you in many respects to think it through in a much more grounded way, much more proactive way to come up with better results. And we found that people, we've done exit interviews and exit surveys, that people who have gone to movie meetups see things differently. They have aha moments. And that's ultimately, I think, what people are going for in a lot of recovery meetings and mutual support meetings are those aha moments. I mean, they're very few and far between. You could go to 1,000 AA meetings and yeah, eventually, it'll, sometimes you don't get it, but you go to check the box, or you go because you're forced, or you go because you told yourself that you would go. And those are all great reasons, but to go because you want to enjoy the experience of watching a film and then discussing it with other people, that's a win because it opens up new ways to have dialogues about the issue of recovery and how to best approach, your own successful recovery.
Right. Yeah, that sounds really, really interesting. So, what you're seeing in these exit polls is you're finding that people are empathizing with the characters in these films in a way that perhaps making them more likely to share their own stories because it gives them kind of a framework to open up to other people on. And
Exactly.
then, okay.
It's a jumping off point because I'll give you an example. Like if you're in a 12-step meeting, and listen, and none of this is to berate 12-step or Smart Recovery or anybody else. These are all great, phenomenal programs. And Smart and Recovery Movie Meetups is not trying to compete with them. This is just another way of having a meeting.
Yeah.
And you have to fill, people are awake for 18 hours a day. So it's something else to do.
Yeah.
And so, part of the thing that I think is valuable about it is that it gives people a visual reference point from which to then jump off and say, so in a 12-step meeting, if somebody comes and tells people, does a drunkalogue about their rock bottom, yes, they're describing something, but no, everybody else is visualizing in their own head what that looks like for them. Yes, the guy is the girl or the lady or the boy, whoever's describing their rock bottom is giving verbal cues, but everybody is modeling what that looks like for themselves in their own head. Some people are seeing it as like rock bottom, disgusting. Others are seeing a different version of it, but everybody's version of that is personal. And so again, their own biases, their own judgment, their own cognitive distortions go into how they envision and model that visual reference, that subjective experience. Again, it's too subjective. And so whatever benefit they can get out of that, whatever they're listening to from the 12-step drunkalogue to what they're imagining in their head, it only has as much effect as their subjective cognitive biases are going to attribute to it. Yes, there might be some moments that like, okay, this rings true, but it's all subjective. Again, your own biases and your own addictive personality, ideas, whatever, are going into probably softening how bad that looks to you based on what the person is describing to you.
Yeah.
But if you see a movie where it's front and center, bam, you see a dude dead on the ground with a needle in their arm and his kids are crying because they've lost their father. You don't have to mental model anything. There's no subjective anything. That is an objective reality that you are looking at, and you can't help but relate that to what your situation is and have it be a cautionary tale that influences your behavior going forward. And if it doesn't, then nothing will, I think, in many respects.
And the other thing that came to mind for me, Ted, was that in peer support meetings, crosstalk is a valuable part of it, but these meetings need to be guarded against, lateral judgments towards the attendees, towards, people are allowed to share, but we don't want other members sort of picking apart someone's life experiences or judging the way that they are telling the story, but to make it a character that we are all looking at. It really changes it up. I get that.
Yes, it does. It really does. And makes it immediate. And, for instance, if you're watching Leaving Las Vegas, and I don't want to give away the ending, but everybody knows the ending. It's a story and a novel basically about a person who goes to Las Vegas with the clear intention of drinking himself to death. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have fantasies about that. They have end time fantasies, and the idea of suicide figures greatly in conversations about addiction recovery. It's an uncomfortable topic. Nobody likes it, but we all know the statistics that people who commit suicide, they're over-indexed in terms of like their addictive problems. Addiction is a clear indicator, is a clear correlate to suicidal ideations and eventual behaviors. And so to see that movie is important in the sense that like it says a lot about, people having those thoughts of like, I'm just going to let it all go. I'm going to just see this all the way to the end. And, the fact that he has options, that he's been given this new love interest in the form of Elizabeth Shue, and you think that, okay, this is the muse that will calm the savage beast. He has the money. He could go to rehab. He could fix his life. There could be a happy ending where he and Elizabeth Shue, she gets out of prostitution. He gets his job back. He goes to rehab. She goes to whatever, and they live happily ever after in the suburbs and have 3 children, and then start a recovery community. Whatever. That is a potential outcome, but that's not the outcome. And the movie teaches us that sometimes you cannot force recovery on people. Sometimes there are unhappy endings, and that's not indicative of like there's always going to be an unhappy ending, but sometimes there are, and we have to be aware of that, and we have to, be in a position where we can turn those lessons into positive reaffirmations of how not to go down that rabbit hole and do things to, and so I think not succeeding at recovery is as important as succeeding in recovery. Although I would say 99% of the movies in our book are all about successful recovery, because that's the eventual heroic end quest.
Right. We were both curious on, is this your idea personally, Ted? Is this something that you've come up with?
The idea of doing cinema therapy has been around for a while. I mean, some people have shown movies. I've talked to many people who say, oh yeah, I used to show 28 Days and whatnot. But I also talked to an equal number of people who had been shown movies when they were in rehab. And they were quite frustrated by the fact that they just put the DVD on play, they watched the movie, they got parked in a meeting room with a bunch of other people for 2 hours to watch the movie. And then the meeting ended and nothing happened. And there was no maybe some light discussion, whatever. But then they just went back to their room or they went outside and chain smoked cigarettes because they're in recovery, whatever it is. And so I thought, wouldn't it be amazing? And I came up with the idea of like combining motivational interviewing questionnaires. And so the book is a series of movies, movie trivia, what the movie's about, what the characters are all about, why this movie is important, and things that you should watch out for from a recovery perspective. And then it asks you a bunch of questions that you can fill out in the workbook about, what did you think about this character? Do you identify with this character? Has that ever happened to you? If you could have made a decision, would you have made a different decision? And if so, what would that decision have been? What do they think the likelihood is of this person actually staying sober in the real world versus how it's portrayed in this movie? Questions like that are like really rich in terms of like evoking rich mental tapestries of inquiry and self-evaluation. And by introducing that in a structural therapeutic way during this meeting, using the workbook as a structured guide, that I think was my original idea. And that's why I wrote the workbook, to formalize. So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. There's a lot of people who've gone before me, and look, the giants that I really stand on are the filmmakers who took tremendous risks by making movies about this dour subject matter. Like, as I write in the book, and this is all, by the way, derived from a book that I wrote, which published last year, called Addicted in Film, which is, movies we love about the habits we hate, which I'll be happy to send you a copy. And basically, the idea of the book is that these are incredible stories of movies, the story behind the making of the movie. When Lost Weekend was made in 1945, nobody knew what, quote, alcoholism was. That wasn't an issue. Nobody was really aware of the fact that somebody could get addicted to alcohol and wind up in a loony bin or commit suicide or worse. There's no such thing as, 12th step. It had just been introduced into the public vocabulary with the Saturday Evening Post article about it, which sort of launched that program and made it preeminent as it is today. And so the whole idea of making a movie, Ray Milland was told by his agents and managers, don't make this movie. Are you kidding me? No, this will ruin your career. And, Billy Wilder, he had mojo because he'd made some hit movies, but he really wanted to talk about this. He really wanted to make this movie. And everyone was like, why would you do that? Why don't you make another comedy? Make another Sunset Boulevard, what have you? But he persisted. They all persisted. They made this movie and it won, 3 Academy Awards, Best Picture. And it's now one of the most influential movies about the issue of addiction recovery, and one that I think must be studied by anybody who has an alcohol use disorder. I watch it once a month. And I bought the movie.
Yeah. Well, that's a tremendously modest answer. This is a good idea. I think this is something that I'm surprised isn't out there. So the fact that you've made this available, it seems to me that it could be something that could move things along a lot faster for some people. Even, like you said, some of these traditional recovery programs, for better or for worse, they can you can see people in there that are kind of closed off for weeks on end, right? Whereas something like this could give those people who maybe aren't the first to speak, the extroverted types, or maybe they are more thoughtful and that's what they've got going on. And this gives them a chance to think a little deeper, and perhaps that's what it takes to get them to come out and form connections, which we know is part of the problem in the first place.
You're absolutely right. You really hit the nail on the head. It's the fact that it evokes people to speak, to open up, and then socialize and compare and contrast with other people, which is crucial because, there's such a social component. And again, and then the visual metaphor idea of this is very powerful. I've done a bunch of research before I wrote this book, and you think about it, decision, and this is all about decision making ultimately, right? So to make a decision, most people have rational proofs, logic, but if people relied on logic and rational truth, we wouldn't have nobody would be an addict. Nobody would have a problem. We wouldn't have this problem. But the fact is we do. And that's because people make decisions about themselves and others, et cetera, based on emotion. We're very much a Captain Kirk emotional side, not the Mr. Spock logical side. We like to think that we're a combination of both, but we're really ultimately, when it comes to addiction and recovery, we're not. We're very emotional. And then so when you come to decision making, and when you come to like big decisions or big policy shifts or big shifts, quantum shifts in people's understanding of problems, think about how visual information has been the guiding principle in some of the biggest shifts in public opinion or public decisions. For instance, a dog biting a small black child, when they took a picture of that and published that in the newspaper, that was the start of the public acceptance of desegregation and the whole Martin Luther King. Think about the poor girl who's running from the napalm and her back's on fire, naked in Vietnam. That was the visual point at which people's perception of the Vietnam War completely shifted. And so that I think, and those are histrionic examples of that. And, I'm not going to say that people are suddenly going to quit the, we're going to solve addiction epidemic by showing somebody who's OD'd on a sidewalk. We see that too much, but there is no face to, we need a face to really sell what we need to do in addiction and recovery. And so I'm not saying we have the face, but there are films portray so many faces of this problem that it gives people an opportunity to engage with any face, hopefully. Maybe it's Sandra Bullock in 28 Days. Maybe it's Leaving Las Vegas and Nicolas Cage. Maybe it's, whomever in any movie. There are a lot of options, and the visual connection gives people a point to say, okay, I've changed my mind about my addiction. I'm changing my mind as to what I'm going to do with myself this afternoon. I'm not going to go to a bar. I'm not going to buy cocaine. I've shifted my point of view. And that's fun. It's like you guys saw Inception, right? With and the amount of stuff that goes into changing your mind. There's a key moment where you don't have to go into somebody's dreams to do this, but it exists where changing your mind is something that can happen very quickly, but all the things that go into it are very complicated. But once you've changed your mind, and Michael Pollan, of course, wrote a book about it called How to Change Your Mind, which is saying that psychedelics can sometimes help in this. And I'm a big proponent of using psychedelic medicine. And I went to Costa Rica and did ayahuasca, and I support all the legislation to open up, again, another pathway to recovery. These, visual metaphors give people these instances where they could make profound shifts in how they see their life and their future. And if we can access those moments with film, fantastic. My job is done.
Yeah.
Nathan and I were talking about, as we prepared for this conversation with you, we got talking about some of the movies specifically. And one of the ones that came up for us, that for both of us, that we were terrified by the notion of having to rewatch was Requiem for a Dream, for example.
That always comes up.
and I can't think of a more, for myself, and maybe I think Nathan would agree, one of the most anxiety inducing, just a terrifying movie, an important movie, just a outstanding movie, but for someone in recovery, that could be terrifying. And so we both we were messaging each other last night and said, I don't know if I could watch that. And then I woke up this morning and I thought, but in the safety of a group setting with some facilitation, is that what's important? Do I take strides with avoidance? I've done some exposure therapy in my recovery and through my workplace to try to reacclimatize myself to the healthcare setting, because there were so many triggers in that setting for me. So I guess I'm posing that as a question for you. Like, how do we balance some of the fear and the big emotions and urges and cravings that could come with a film, or the emotional reactions? How do we keep that safe for people? How have you worked towards that piece?
Corey, Corey, I think first off, that is a phenomenal question. And also, I'm really glad that you asked that question, because that's come up and I think it really needs to be addressed. For instance, in the bad version of things, people say, why on earth would you have anybody in recovery watch Requiem for a Dream or this movie or that movie? You're going to trigger them. They're going to be freaked out. They're going to wonder what you're doing. They're going to feel hurt. They're going to relapse, whatever. And that potentially could be true, let's say. But then again, I don't think anybody really needs movies or anything else to have triggers to relapse. Okay, that's
Right.
all around you. I walk out my door, I see the 7-Eleven. I remember all the booze I used to buy there at 6 a.m. when they opened. Okay,
Right.
I get it. It's all
Right.
around us. So the argument that somehow seeing objective representations of drug use or alcohol use is going to trigger you is not a valid. It can be in a certain context if it's gratuitous, and here's the point of why Recovery Movie Meetups has been more formalized and reviewed by clinicians. And, we have an advisory board with people from Harvard University, Brown University. I mean, this is like, we've got some serious clinically valid points of view on this, who all agree on the following, which is that if you introduce the film in a therapeutic context where you say, you are watching this film in all of its gritty detail, because it has something very important to show you about the nature of addiction, about the possible solutions to your own addiction, to perhaps scare you, to perhaps inspire you, but more than anything else, to educate you about what you're up against. And we think that this is important. And when you contextualize and introduce the movie like that, in a setting like this, in a social setting like this, people get it. And so they see the movie in a completely different way, in a way which is positive and beneficial, because they understand why they are there and why they were watching the movie. And then secondly, people would say, well, you don't want to trigger people. Our response is, no, you do. You do want to trigger people. You want people to watch this movie and feel triggered and to say, stop the movie. Or after the movie, talk to the facilitator and the group of people that are with you and say, I was so triggered in that scene with X, Y, and Z. Now you can talk about that trigger in a forum which becomes extremely constructive. Yeah. As opposed to you're wandering around, you see 7-Eleven, you see your dealer that used to deal, and you just get a trigger and you go buy dope from that. See, there's no therapeutic intervention possible in that moment of being triggered in the real world. So if you're triggered in this controlled setting, you have the wherewithal and the support to overcome the trigger, overcome the need to the idea of relapse, and then throw in all the therapeutic support that you can to break it all apart, analyze your irrational thoughts and beliefs about your trigger, blow them all apart, and then come up with better options when you actually do go into the real world. So encountering a trigger in the movie world becomes a reinforcement of how to overcome it in the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually. And it leads us into another question that we had, which is, how are the movies chosen? Is it something that a panel of experts have went through over decades of research, or what? How did you?
No. Warner Brothers paid me $1 million to only recommend Warner Brothers movies.
Can we get involved in this in some way?
Well, listen, I tell you. Well, listen, I part of my recovery, and I this is really sort of like the central premise of the book I wrote, Addicted in Film: Movies We Love About the Habits We Hate, was that I decided, all right, well, I'm going to watch 100 movies in 100 days because I have a lot of time on my hand. I have money in the bank. I don't have time to go to a bar. I'm not going to drink today. I got to fill the time, and I don't necessarily feel ready to start a project or anything. I'm new to, recovery. I'm newly sober. Let me see. I read every book. I'm tired of reading. I want to see something. And so I started watching these movies, and I watched over 100 movies. And I started to see clear patterns. I took detailed notes. I looked at analysis. I looked at every movie that I could to find what was in there that I thought could be beneficial from the point of view of helping me in my recovery and helping others in theirs by extension. And so I came up with like about 30 to 40 movies, which I thought were well produced enough that they were accessible, that they could be rented or bought if people needed to get to them, that they weren't some obscure movie that like you could only see on some crazy streaming network if you subscribed, or it's on YouTube in grainy black and white. No, I wanted to do something where you could have access to this product if you wanted to see it on iTunes or Amazon or Prime or etc. And then the other criteria was like, does it have gratuitous depictions of alcohol or drug use, but with no redeeming value, such that the people use drugs and alcohol and they get away with it and there's no repercussions and it's a consequence-free environment? Well, no, most of the films that I chose all had clear repercussions that were very black and white. They did that, they lost everything, they had to go to the rehab, they emerged from rehab, or in Nicolas Cage's case, he died. So I chose those very carefully, but I also wanted to choose films like, for instance, people ask me, why did you include Reefer Madness in this? It's a horrible movie. If anything, it's a joke about how, we hyper criminalize pot, and like the people that are smoking pot are all crazy. And, this is, it's an over the top scare tactic. But something to learn about that is how we use media to depict addiction, and how we use stigma, and how we use fear tactics, and how we sort of criminalize people who use drugs. Reefer Madness is really sort of like a propaganda blitz that was used by the nascent, Department of Drug Policy, et cetera, and self-serving interests to vilify people who are using drugs. And there were clear purposes behind that. There was no reason. Doctors had signed off saying, marijuana is not addictive. It doesn't turn people into crazy criminals. But what Hearst magazines and newspapers and the whole, published consciousness of reefer turned into was a kind of a crazy vilification of a whole class of people, usually black. The idea was that we're going to have marauding gangs of black violent sex offenders smoking dope, stepping out of line, and raping white women. That really was one of the subtexts of that. That's how it was sold to the public. And so when we look at that movie now from that perspective, then it informs a lot of how we see the war on drugs, criminalization now, what the steps that we're taking in harm reduction and everything to sort of like remove stigma from seeking help. Again, 90% of people who need help don't get it because they're, for whatever reason, but a lot of that is stigmatization. They think that they're suddenly criminals, they're going to lose their jobs, they're tarnished, they're morally bankrupt. All of those are ideas that started with Reefer Madness and other slate of movies and news stories that were created around crack queens, Reagan's war on drugs, the let's just say no. All of this is all part of a very complex and kind of a crappy story about how, it's all been the addict's fault all along. And they're the bad guy. We got to lock them up. And of course we get into the whole prison industrial complex, and then look at Dopesick. Look at that documentary on Hulu with Michael Keaton about the weird, bizarre Byzantine inner workings of how you create an opioid epidemic with synthetic opiates and make it seem like that's perfectly acceptable. And that like really it's the addict's fault. No, we don't make an addictive drug. They're getting addicted. We're not making an addictive drug. I mean, if you want real conspiracies as opposed to fake conspiracy theories that everybody is so enamored of, look no further than the drug policy. Look no further than the opioid epidemic. Look no further than the incarceration rates in America. I mean, and this is all very political. We're getting a little bit off topic, but I wanted to show that a lot of the movies that I included in this analysis have some very important and interesting things to say about that, and that can help people's recovery as well. And also, I think ultimately help clinicians in how they treat people who are in recovery.
Yeah. And all of the movies on your list that I can think of that I have seen, Ted, one of the common threads of them are characters that I feel endeared to, that I feel
good.
That I feel an understanding of, or that would understand me. And so too is the case in peer support meetings. I've never left a peer support meeting where I didn't look at the people around me and think, I get that person, or that person really got me tonight when I said what I said. And there's so much power in that too. Maybe
I agree.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Ted.
I want to say, a lot of people sort of they don't really understand the physiological, neurobiological basis of peer support. Yes, we're with other people, we're, etc. But, we have mirror neurons. As human beings, we are looking at other human beings. We're looking at their faces. We're obsessed with what they do, what they don't do, how they react to us, and how we react to them. This is going on all the time. That's why we're social animals. And I can see this and know this from a perspective of a father of a child who has autism and doesn't have this capability. And so I'm more attuned to really the rich subtext that goes on when people look at each other and share in a group. And so, and mirror neurons in your brain, when somebody does something, you imitate them. You don't do it consciously, but you sort of model how you're going to imitate that person. And sometimes you actually do imitate that person. You model your behavior based on other people's behavior. If you're modeling your behavior based on good behaviors, then you're modeling good behavior. And by doing that in a group with other people, fueled by modeled behavior that's been modeled by the Hollywood filmmakers who model behavior better than anybody because they have special effects and movies and all the tools of the trade. Imagine how powerful that is.
Yeah, hugely powerful, hugely powerful. And you're right. I can think back to conversations that Nathan and I have where we are mirroring each other unknowingly, and you can look back on YouTube and see us doing that, and that's just what we're doing without even thinking about it, of course.
And it's a good thing. It's totally fine. That's what human beings do. That's their adaptive advantage. That's cooperation and progress is based on is the theory of mind. Getting into somebody else's mind, understanding what they're thinking, what they could be thinking, and how that could affect you or what you could do to help them or vice versa.
Right. Yep. So if somebody wanted to get involved as far as the workbook is concerned, or maybe they want to get involved in making this a periodic part of their recovery group, what do you suggest as far as how often this is done, and how do people do that? Do they just go to your website or...
Yeah. There's a website called recoverymoviemeetups.com, and it's soup to nuts. It's got everything. It's got a web page where I have a list of all the movies that we recommend, along with links to iTunes, to Amazon Prime, to DVDs, to anything you want, with ratings, synopsis, everything. So you have a resource to find the movies. You can also purchase the workbook at wholesale prices. You can also register to start the meeting, which gives you discounts. It also entitles you to free training, but the training is not required. It's just recommended. And I'm working with the American Society of Addiction Medicine right now, ASAM, to actually qualify the training, to have people qualify to get continuing education credits if they take the training. So that's something that I'm going to set up in the next couple of weeks. And so by doing all that, then the person is registered, they agree to best practices, and then they get the workbook. And so then, they can talk to me or somebody else and get guidance as to how to set up a meeting. There's a tutorial. There's all kinds of resources for people to figure out the format. We even give you sample templates as to sample formats. If you're an IOP, you have the people for fewer hours during the day. So maybe you want to cut the movies up into segments. If you're residential, you probably have a whole weekend to fill. So you can do maybe a movie every day on Saturday or Sunday, or maybe just once a week or during the week, whatever it is. It's all tailor made. And I want to give people the flexibility of not being locked into a format. I want people to feel that they can own their own formats. So once you have the workbook, hand out the workbooks to the people in your meetings, and they can put their names on them. That's their workbook. That's their recovery capital in a way. And then that's the workbook that you use when you see the movies, and then fill out the questionnaires later, and then come back together and discuss the questions that you wrote down. It's actually a wonderful journaling exercise as well. You don't even have to see the movies in group to see the movies yourself, and then fill out the questionnaires as a way to help your own recovery. But the basic setup is you register, buy the workbooks, set up your meeting, and then hold the meeting as often or as not often as you like. And you can also choose the movies that you want to show. If you think, for instance, that like if you're in a recovery setting where you've just got a bunch of people who were just getting off heroin addiction, let's say, maybe not Requiem for a Dream. It might not be what you lead with. Maybe you want to go with like 28 Days First, and maybe you want to go with Clean and Sober, that shows people in this particular context like, hey, you know what? You're here because recovery and rehab works. Look at this movie. Sandra Bullock comes out of this. She comes out okay. Rehab is a real thing. It's legitimate. You should be, the themes of those movies are Sandra Bullock starts saying, I don't belong here. I'm not like you people. That's typical for rehab. Everybody thinks that. They think they're special. I don't belong here. I'm just checking a box. I just want to get out of trouble with the law. But then the longer they're in there, the more they realize, wow, I do have a problem. I need to get better. That's what I'm here for. Then you show them Requiem for a Dream or these other movies that are a little bit more powerful, because then it becomes a reinforcement of a decision that they've already internally made themselves. So instead of it being something that freaks them out at the very beginning, if you layer it in sequentially later, which is, the sequencing of the films, as we call it, then you can have better results. And we've found that softer movies first that have a certain message, and then, harder movies later. And then in the middle, just show movies that show the experience of what addiction means for other people in relationships. What it means for like 4 Good Days or Beautiful Boy, the effect that your addiction is having and has had on other people. Those become reaffirming messages and visual cues for you to make emotional determinations about empathy and redemption and forgiveness, and how to approach your spouse who might be sober and you're in recovery. What are you going to do when you go back to that marriage? So you look at movies like When a Man Loves a Woman or Days of Wine and Roses. They're all layered in what I think is a sequential, overall holistic view of what recovery usually should look like or could look like to get the best results from a multiple point of view reference points.
That makes sense too. Yeah. Is this something that's available now? People can go get all this stuff right now? Okay.
You can go to Amazon.com, and obviously you can get the Recovery Movie Meetups at retail, and go for it. But if you'd like to start a meeting and get the books at wholesale, because we sell it like bundles of like 20 books a piece. Sometimes we can go up as 100. I have an order for 1,000 books right now that I'm fulfilling. So some entities have multiple facilities that they want to get a bunch of books for to save money. We also do branded books. So, Zion Treatment in Utah has 60 facilities. We're doing 1,000 copies. They're branded like it's a Zion product, but it's Recovery Movie Meetups. Zion presents a Recovery Movie Meetups. So we can do that for treatment facilities. So it's a bespoke white label kind of application that helps their entity and also helps their branding, but also makes people in those facilities feel good. It's like, okay, I'm here at Ashley Treatment, and I'm reading the Ashley Treatment's Recovery Movie Meetups program book and doing the work. And to me, it's win-win. It's just wonderful that people want to do it that way. And I think it's wonderful to work with treatment facilities that are rolling this out nationally. Those are just terrific results as far as I'm concerned. Even by the same token, it doesn't even have to be that big. Like anybody who wants to set up a recovery movie meetup, just like anybody who wants to set up a smart recovery meeting can do that. Only thing is you have to take the training and pay for the training. In my case, you don't have to pay for the training, or you don't have to take any training. I give you templates, you follow the rules, you sign off on the best practices, and realize that you're, accountable to the people that you're serving, and you're doing this in good faith with an honest desire to help. And go ahead and start a recovery movie meetup. You can do it online or face-to-face, rent the movies, and off you go and help people.
Yeah.
A great idea.
I just really see this as enriching the depth of conversation in any of those settings, whether it's an online meeting or in a facility or with a group of friends. Like the richness of conversation that can come from some of these films and having that dialogue is just so valuable. So I just really commend you for the recovery movie meetups.
I appreciate that. It's it's never easy to sort of introduce the new treatment, or mutual support modality into this marketplace. But then the same token, I thought, people, I don't want to make it sound like a criticism because it's not, but a lot of people overall, you think about it, going to a meeting is like, it's an obligation, or it's something that you feel that you need to do, or some things you have to do. You don't expect the meeting to be fun or interesting or funny or dynamic. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but mostly it is what it is. And so I thought the idea of like making movies that making meetings that people really want to look forward to, that they say, oh, I'm going to get something. I'm not just going to get to see a free movie, but I'm also going to get to talk about it. I get a therapeutic benefit from it, something to think about, something to take away. People pay money to go see movies, well, obviously they have value. And they're fun, and people don't do things just because. And so to do something because it's a good thing for it to do, but also a fun thing to do, Who says that recovery meetings can't be fun? That's the whole point I want to make.
Yeah.
And not every recovery movie meeting is going to be great or fun. I'm not presuming that, but I think there's a good chance that people will get a little bit more or different things that they could get from other meetings. That really ultimately the format of those meetings has not changed for a quarter or half a century.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you can provide a little more value in the time allotted too, I think that's important. And this modality might be able to do that. So yeah, commendable efforts. And was there anything else you wanted to add that we've missed as far as?
Yeah, well, you know what? I'd love to I'd love to invite all of your listeners to a special event. Part of the Recovery Movie Meetups thing is that we're building a community, and we're also building a community based on content, on videos, on rich media, on events that people can really share and become a part of. So I created the Recovery Movie Meetups film series, which is a series of free films. I've licensed the films at my own expense, and then I show them online via StreamYard. Basically, it's like a glorified, but we have it on YouTube live stream, Facebook TV, and LinkedIn online TV. So 3 different ways to view on any laptop, mobile device, or anything. Or, if you're sitting in a treatment facility, you can just go to the YouTube app and open up the YouTube app on your Roku or your Fire Stick or your smart TV or your Chromecast or whatever it is, and search for this film and watch it. And our premiere of the movie live is going to be this May 14th, Sunday, Mother's Day. But late in the evening, it's at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And all you have to do is go to recoverymoviemeetups.com/events. And all the information is there. You can RSVP if you'd like to. There's all the information of where to stream it, how to stream it, links to stream it, links to put it into your calendar, links to share it with your friends. I'll send you the links, and you can definitely share that on the podcast page. But I would love for people to come. Everyone's invited, and people are invited to share if they want to. There's also an invitation that if you and your treatment facility would like to give a shout out to everybody live, to all the hundreds of other treatment facilities that are watching simulcast, then go ahead. A little bit like the Super Bowl. We're like, let's go to the Army base in Oman, where our boys in uniform are saying hello to the fans. So I want to do it like, create a real sense of community, because we are a community, and really this effort of giving this free screening is sort of our humble way of saying, thank you for everything that you guys do, both of you, but also people in the recovery sector. We're all doing the work. We're all fighting the good fight. We're trying the best we can against an implacable foe and unlikely odds, a little bit like what these movies are. That's what movies are. It's art imitates life, imitates art. And so, we're all doing our part. Now, I just want to sort of give celebration and thanks to the power of that community by giving them a freebie. Make some popcorn. The movie's on us, basically.
Sounds good, Ted.
And I should tell you about the movie also, and not just any movie. We're screening the movie Clean Slate, which is a wonderful documentary, feature-length documentary, just that is absolutely terrific. It's about 2 guys that are in a treatment facility who decide that part of the recovery, they're going to make a movie about recovery, and so they make this short film. So as if recovery isn't hard enough, making a movie about recovery while you're in recovery. I mean, think about it. So I'm in the film business. Making movies is impossible. It's an accident waiting to happen. And yet these guys somehow do it. And you got to see the movie. It's absolutely, in equal terms, heartbreaking, hilarious, amazing, inspirational. It's just a terrific film. And I'm just so pleased to be able to bring it to the community.
Yeah, that is a great film. And we will definitely put a link up for people on our website so they can take part in that. That sounds really good.
Yay. Thank you so much, you guys. I really appreciate it. And please, if you'd like to be a presenting partner on the event, send me your logo and give a shout out. And thank you so much for helping us promote Recovery Movie Meetups and our events. There's more to come. So once you're in the system, we got more movies coming up. We got some stuff that's really going to blow your mind. I'm spending quite a bit of time and effort and money securing rights to really cool movies that I think are going to make a real impact. All
right. That sounds great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. We'll keep track of you and check in from time to time and see how things are going with it. But thanks for your time, Ted. And thanks for letting us know about this project. Sounds pretty exciting. And yeah.
Yeah, much appreciated.
Canada! Oh, Canada!
I don't think he knows our anthem. All right. Okay,
Thanks,
Ted,
Ted.
have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.